Well, there's the problem. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. We've got the Axial CJ7 here on the bench. And as you can see, there's things missing from inside. Now, I recently did a video where I showed you how to calculate the center of gravity of a vehicle, and I used the Axial CJ as the example to do that. Now, it's a quick and easy method that gives you a pretty good estimation of where the center of gravity of your vehicle sits. And if you're interested in being able to figure that out, I'll put a link to that video below. But we used the CJ for it, and it was in the stock form plus the 3200 milliamp 3S Spectrum battery that I had installed in the factory location. Now, driving the CJ7, it didn't drive the way that I wanted. It drove, top heavy, it rolled over a decent amount, and it wasn't that planted feel that I really like from my trail trucks. So as much as I like the styling of this, I wanted to make the performance of it follow more closely to what I hoped that it would do. So to do that, I decided to dive in and change a good bit about what sits inside of this CJ7 body. Now, in my opinion, the biggest culprit of the high center of gravity was this transmission setup from Axial. This is their 2-speed and dig transmission that comes in here. It does offer quite a bit of features in there, like I mentioned. It comes with a 2-speed setup out of the it comes with a dig setup out of the box, and it's 2-speed capable. You can swap that around depending on which one you're after. But for what I was after, I wanted performance first. I'll add some features later if that's what I'm after. So this whole unit was ripped out from underneath of this body, and what I had planned to do was swap a VFD transmission, the Vanquish VFD transmission, because it puts the motor forward and low. Not as far forward as the stock Axial transmission, but considerably lower. And overall, it's just less weight. The VFD isn't necessarily a lightweight transmission on its own, but of course it can be built that way with some of the option parts if that's the route that you're going for. So I ripped out this, and then I had a VFD transmission, and I needed to figure out how to put it inside of this. And with the help of my Mitutoyo calipers and a little ruler, I was able to knock that out pretty easily. It only took me a few hours in CAD and a couple of 3D printed prototypes to get done what I was after. So we'll pop this body off, go over that. Now you can see that I've got the new transmission and motor in place. Currently, I don't have the receiver plugged in. We'll get to that here shortly. I'm swapping out the Spectrum 2-in-1 ESC receiver combo for this Spectrum 2-in-1 ESC motor combo, and I'll put a separate receiver in place. That is hard to say all of those things in the proper order, but all of that's out. I still have the stock servo in there for now. We'll get that replaced with something here shortly. I've got a couple of reef servos sitting here, but they're direct power servos, and I think that I want one of the smart servos in here instead. So that'll come down the road. But getting the VFD in here was the biggest hurdle. And what I had come up with is two very simple 3D printable parts that allowed me to kind of drop this in. It was a matter of placing it kind of where I thought it was, just moving it around, connecting some dots, and then slowly building. I built the back half of the mount first. It replaces the driver's side rear upper link mount. Those bolt onto the skid plate separately. So I did have to do a couple of revisions, go through, make sure my clearances were good, and I need one modification to the skid plate itself. There's two bosses that come up to hold that stock upper link mount, and you've got to clip the outside one off just to give me the strength that I feel like a 3D printed part needs to be able to function in that situation. The hole that is used to clamp the link mount down is also a hole that is used to bolt the VFD transmission in place on that driver's side. And then it cradles around the bottom side of the transmission and captures the other two mounting holes on the passenger side of the VFD. The bottom two holes on the skid plate go into that 3D printable mount to just help lock everything in place. And then for the front portion, I did a single mount off the passenger side. There is a mount that is on the driver's side as well, but this thing's in there rock solid and I have no concerns. This VFD was actually one that I had built up as a spare for one of my nationals builds like a year and a half ago. So it's got the 21% overdrive in the transfer case already as well. So that overdrive is going to be a nice performance update for this truck. It's got the machined gears already, machined motor plate, and I'm running one machined aluminum post. I don't have a post on the other side at all. It's just, you don't necessarily need it. You can run it if you want. And I'm not running the shrouds either. So just kind of up there, but with a single mount on one side, it's going to be just fine. Now this does sit a little bit higher than it does in a VFD skid plate just because I'm kind of dodging around some other things, but it still sits much, much lower, like 30 millimeters lower than the stock transmission that was in here. One other change that I had to make to run this transmission is that I needed to put in a longer front drive shaft. The output was a little bit further back and the stock front drive shaft wanted to kind of fall out. So I replaced it with just another stock drive shaft that I had off of either another Axial or a Vanquish, and just a little bit longer than the other one, and it dropped right in. Make sure everything stays in place where it's supposed to. The transmission swap was super simple after I designed the parts. The design of the parts was the hard part, bolting it in, dirt simple. Now, depending on your gearing, you may have to do a little bit of clearancing for some of the mounts, not a huge deal. But with that being mentioned, I am going to put up the mounts onto my website if you want to download them and print them to be able to do this swap yourself, if that's something you're after. I do think that it's going to greatly increase the performance of this truck by leaps and bounds. I got rid of the rear battery tray, and the side battery tray comes in place already. The Velcro's already there, and I'm running a 1300 milliamp 3S on that side. Now, the top of this transmission right here did contact the underside of my body. I could tell it was just barely contacting. It just didn't want to sit down perfectly. So with the body in place on the truck and pushed down, I just reached up there with a long nose marker and just kind of scribbled around at the edge of the transmission so that I could see where everything was resting, and I could see that lip or that edge where the transmission was. And from there, I just heated up the Lexan with my heat gun, and once I got it hot, I just kind of pressed it in with a plastic handled tool to get it to kind of just give me a little bit of an indent. Swapping these out to button heads would probably do as much clearance as you needed. It was that close, like a millimeter or two of interference. Super simple. After I did all of those modifications, I put the body back in place on this, and I went back and I redid the test of that center of gravity experiment that I showed in the previous video and talked about at the beginning here. And just with the same running gear, no other change other than the battery position and size and the motor and transmission change, the center of gravity had already greatly changed. If you watch that first video, the center of gravity was estimated to be kind of in this area of the door, the middle upper portion towards the back of it. Again, that was with the larger battery and the stock transmission. With the changes that we've made already, the center of gravity has already moved from up in this area all the way down into the lower portion of the door. A huge change already, and we haven't made any other modifications. Now, all of that being said, the center of gravity test does have effect because it is basically shown at full extension of the suspension. So that does change things. It's not at a ride height, but when you're crawling, the truck is moving around and that's constantly shifting anyway. So the way that I showed it is just an easy way to get a baseline, something to easily replicate. There are other methods. There's methods used in the full size, but the full size guys, they do methods that they still have a number of things in there that kind of add factors of fudging, but that's because they don't have the ability or the ease to just lift a car up in a couple of places and take out so many of those factors. But with all of that said, I'm not done yet. I just wanted to do that part first. From there, I've already got the parts that I want to make this build pretty much how I think that I want it in the end. And what we're gonna do from here is we're gonna take off these super tall stock shocks that sit way up in the air, and we're gonna replace them with some 90mm shocks. I've already got the shocks built and bled. We're also going with some thicker shock fluid, going to some 60 weight in here to help slow this thing down from being so jostly. So I've got those built, bled, ready to get bolted on, and then we're gonna do new wheels and tires. Now, the tires that come on here performed fine. They look okay. I just don't like Mickey Thompson tires. I don't like the style. I never really have. It's just a personal preference of the visual style. That's it. And then, of course, the plastic wheels. It's just, they're plastic wheels. I'd rather have some very nice aluminum wheels. So I've already built up a set of the Vanquish KMC impacts with some Skarn rings. This is the blue impact, gray Skarn to kind of go with the theme that they have on the body. And then I'm also going to mount up some of the new Vanquish Yokohama Geolander MTs. These are a 4.75 inch tall tire, very similar to the stock tires. Inside of these new tires also, I have swapped out the stock foams for the Vanquish 2-stage stance foams. So at this point, they haven't been broken in at all. They've got a little bit of a crown to the tire shape, but that's gonna flatten out as these tires just break in even a little bit. So at this stage, before we wrap this video up, I'm going to pull the wheels, tires, and shocks off of this, swap this all on, and we're gonna take this thing from looking, you know, high and top heavy to, I think, much lower and meaner. Let's jump into this final stage. And there we go. Out with the old shocks, wheels, tires, and transmission. Here we've got the final product of what I was going for. Much, much lower overall. At full compression, those tires are gonna rub these fenders a little bit, but I am sitting as low as I can as far as the available shock mounting on the inner fender side there. If I want to gain a few millimeters, I can just move those down, but a little bit of rubbing, it's not gonna hurt anybody. If it starts grabbing and popping as it's going, then we'll adjust something. Full compression in the rear is gonna also rub around that lip a little bit, but I'm even less worried about the rear. The front, when it's steering, it can be a little bit more of an issue. The rear, not much. Maybe a little bit of preload on those rear shocks, if anything. Also, when I did put the wheels and tires together, I did add wheel weights to the inside of those front wheels with the new powder metal clamp rings that are available from Vanquish. So they've got a real decent amount of heft to it, which is gonna help this thing be even more planted. I did go run the center of gravity test one final time before filming this portion, but I haven't really put it in the computer to see where everything intersects. My guess is that we're gonna be much closer down to the actual like rock slider area for our center of gravity now. For me, I think that I've got this really close to where I want it to be. So once I get a steering servo in there and change over that ESC plug to an XT60, we'll be able to get this thing back out on the rocks and see how it compares to what we did at the outset. I don't have a lot of concerns. I think that it's going to be a pretty drastic improvement over where we were at the start. Our tipping point now is so much further than it was before. I think this thing is going to just feel rock solid. But that's going to complete my modifications for today. If you guys are interested in picking up those files to download and 3D print yourself, I'll put a link below to where you can find them on my website. With that, appreciate you guys all for watching. Hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe if you're not already. Hit the notification bell so you see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. Thanks as always, and we'll see you on the next one.